Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild Adventure League module, Those That Came Before, designed by Alan Patrick for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, and Rodney, and gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Numa, Marcos David Vicente, Gilberto, Sean A.K., Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, and Arash. Thank you all very much for your support. If you haven't seen my review of the last week's review, which was the previous module in the Saga of the Worm series designed by Alan Patrick, it is also an Adventures League module, and I spoke more about my experiences and opinions of the Adventures League, so I will briefly repeat them here, which is that I have zero experience with the Adventures League, but I do appreciate what it tries to do, which is create a workable solution for folks to show up with a character sheet to play at either conventions or game stores or whatever else and have this sense of progression when maybe you don't have a regular group to go to and you want to try to keep everything within the same overarching rule set. So this is an Adventures League module, which means it has some good notes on DMing in general, as well as DMing the specific adventure. And it has things like, DM experience and players gain certain amounts of experience and magic levels. It's supposed to be very carefully balanced. All of those things are wrapped up in what is an Adventures League module. Now, this is the second of 3 adventures made in a series that were written, I believe, around the time that the Princes of the Apocalypse storyline had ended. It doesn't have anything to do with those so much. The first adventure had some neat Easter eggs for an item that you could get in Horde of the Dragon Queen, but this one doesn't necessarily have any references to those. So you could play this as a standalone. It is a tier 3 adventure, but it can be scaled up to tier 4, which is really pretty cool because I do not see a whole lot of content, at least in my experience that I've reviewed so far, on the DM's Guild that focuses on higher level adventures. Usually it's tier 1 and tier 2 because that's where most of D&D is being played. I mean, hell, look at all the official 5th edition campaign adventures. They're all start at tier 1 and then they end pretty much at the early levels of tier 3. So it's really cool to see an adventure that is straight up scaled for tier 3, designed for tier 3, but could also be scaled up to tier 4, which is really pretty interesting. I do like this adventure. It has some of the same cons as the first one, which is, plain black and white, very little art, that kind of stuff, which I think is par for the course for anything that's an Adventures League module. But I find the dungeon is a bit more conventional than the previous one. The previous had this cool, like, underground dome pyramid laboratory thing going on. But the actual content is better. I thought it's a very solid dungeon crawl through a lich's lair from the Netherese Empire, one that's crashed into the ground. You end up teleporting there from Candlekeep. And it's just got a pretty good balanced mix of, combat and exploration. There's some traps there. You can find some rooms, and there's a really, really excellent part where you basically get the quest from a lich who is pissed at another lich for being too lichy, which I think is awesome. I love role-playing liches. I think they're just an amazing monster type to use in a role-playing context and not necessarily as a combatant. So that's really fun. And then the final epic showdown is against this big undead dragon atop one of these crystals holding the aspect of chaos, which kind of ties all of these the Saga of the Worm adventures by this designer together, which is they all have to do with the undead god, the worm that walks Caius, who's trapped in all these crystals, so that affects a lot of different creatures. So pretty cool. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. And I like I said, it's basically just a tier 3 dungeon crawl, which I think is a pretty solid dungeon to have. And you could play it as a standalone. You certainly don't have to play it as a continuation of this Saga of the Worm adventure. You'll get more in terms of like, oh, this also has to do with the Caius god and it trapped inside of a thing. But you could just play it off as one of the many threats that adventurers have to deal with everywhere they go. So you could play this as a one shot if you wanted to, pretty simply because the adventure hook is you basically show up at Candlekeep and because you get like an invitation and they usher you in, and they've got, because it just kind of assumes like a tier 3, you're kind of called to action by various people at this point. And you get a device that just teleports you to the dungeon. So pretty easily you could just get your characters there however way you want to, because they literally just have a thing that teleports them to the thing. Act 1 is basically just that. It's at Candlekeep. So, and it mentions the fact that, if you're running this at a convention or something where obviously time is always a factor, then you can really skip ahead and just kind of montage or role play your way through the Candlekeep stuff. Although it does have a pretty fun character named Pot, short for Ink Pot, that's kind of this excitable, scholar type character. It seems like a fun person to role play as. So the first bit is a lot of just notes on, running an Adventures Guild module, being a dungeon master in general, as well as any important things that players will need to know. It has a very nice adventure overview section. All the locations and NPCs are spelled out. This is a very, very well organized adventure. I like to see all that stuff at the beginning. And the adventure hooks, again, not the best, but I get that Adventures League stuff, it's hard to have good, meaningful adventure hooks when you're basically just creating a series of one-shots and you need to get people into the meat of the adventure as quickly as possible. Like, you really need to get them to Act 2 where the things start happening, because a lot of players, especially in the beginning when you're there, you can be moving pretty slow and people want to get in the, ease into role-playing and all that. But so I like that the Act 1 of these modules so far seem to be written in a way that you can skip ahead fairly easily, or you can spend more time in them if you want. Candlekeep is a neat location, but you don't really do anything here. You basically just stand in line. There's a lot of flavor text, but you're ushered in. You get a device that is meant to just break open, and that teleports you to the actual dungeon. So we can, and I'm skipping ahead on all this too, because it's just, I think it's pretty good, but it's also easily skippable, as it should be for an Adventures League module. The actual dungeon is the Warlock's Crypt, which I will skip ahead to the actual dungeon map because it's easier for me to give an overview of and what's going on. So, first of all, it's very cool that we get a color grid top-down dungeon map. Yay. However, that is a major but, a major caveat here. And that is, there's a fine print that says, this is literally all we get. We get this low-res annotated version. This is like the DM's map, basically. We do not get a separate player version of this map. Not only do we not get that, but it's a separate purchase, which I was flabbergasted. The map for this section can be acquired via drive-through RPG thanks to the fine folks from Heroic Maps. The version included in this adventure is intentionally low resolution. That is bullshit. If you're going to include if your entire adventure is a dungeon crawl, and then you're going to say that the dungeon map is a separate purchase, that's crap. That is utter crap. People should not have to purchase a separate, because most folks are going to need that map, I would imagine. You can do Theater of the Mind. You can work around it, certainly. We do get the DM's map, so that's the bare minimum. But the fact that we don't really get a separate map, and the fact that it's a separate purchase, that really sucks. Like, that really took the wind out of my sails for enjoying what is otherwise a really fantastic adventure and very well put together. I absolutely loathe that this is a separate purchase. Like, somehow you need to work with the map designer and be able to include this. If you have to charge more, then that's fine, I think. But I think this needs to be included as a full color map for people to use if your entire adventure is based on this dungeon crawl. If it's just one part of a bigger thing, then that might be different. That would probably color my expectations differently. But if your entire product is based on a dungeon crawl, and then to say that the dungeon map is a separate purchase is very, very bad. So that being said, I do like this dungeon design quite a bit. There's a weird bit where you actually teleport outside the dungeon. You have to run inside. There's like hordes of demons and dragons. I would just have people teleport into the circle. There's a nice trap on a door here at 11. So you can see my cursor. Where it blasts a sunbeam out. It's got a little inscription that shows people getting melted by the sun. There's a really cool, probably my favorite part is if they go east in the door to room number 4, there's a series of unlocked chests that are wrapped in chains with a bunch of runes on them, and there's a statue at the end of the hallway, and there's some inscription on the door behind them if the players think to turn around that basically warns them about, leave this shit alone or we'll get you, which is always a great thing to give to players, is like, give them the option of fucking with something, and then of course they will have the consequences of doing so. And the best thing to do that is to put a bunch of loot that players would want. And the idea here is, once the players open the chests, they're not trapped, but instead it powers up the chain devil that is released from the statue at the end of the hallway, depending on how many chests are opened, which is really neat, which is a difficult thing for the DM to decide. And like, when do when do the players decide to not open any more chests? Maybe they figured out that things aren't happening, or you have to kind of balance that out about when do I actually accept, like, okay, they've stopped opening chests, now I'm going to unleash the thing. But it's a really neat system where the chain devil basically gets extra powers and abilities. I believe like another one spawns depending on how many chests the players open. So I thought that was a really neat concept, one that I hadn't really seen in terms of a unique kind of puzzle slash trap slash puzzle slash combat encounter that players can have here in Room 4. There's some battles with a bunch of wraiths in 5, I believe. There's some Death Knights in 9, which the Death Knight stat block is crazy. It's like a CR 17. But when they're reduced to half hit points, they actually kind of explode into a bunch of worms, which is very flavorful for the Kaya stuff, who's the worm that walks. It's a bunch of these undead worm manifestation thing, which is a neat idea. I like having creatures that turn into other creatures during a battle. I actually use that for one of the combat encounters in our Tomb of Annihilation campaign. I had a bunch of spoiler, I guess, for our campaign, statues that were animated by ghosts, and then when the players destroyed the statues, they spawned, I forget what, like banshees or something. Maybe it was a wraith, I don't know, but some kind of a ghostly apparition type creature. So it was like a 2-in-1 fight. So this is similar to that, which is probably a nice way to balance it, because Death Knights seem extremely powerful. There's a few more traps. There's like a bunch of pools that players can mix liquid and explode. But then they finally get to 15, they meet the Lich. Now, there was a system I was initially impressed with where it says you're supposed to keep track of how many like successes and failures players have when it comes to all the different traps and things, which there aren't that many traps or puzzles. But it ends up just being kind of a role-playing thing where the Lich just kind of, it flavors like how much this Lich reacts to how powerful the players are. Because he basically is like testing them. He's looking for a group of champions to go knock down the door of his superior Lich, who is Larlock, which is apparently, and unfortunately, this one is very well steeped in Forgotten Realms lore, which is unfortunately lost on me because I am not very well versed in Forgotten Realms lore, but Larlock is a major a villain in the D&D universe, so unfortunately, that was lost on me. But from what I can read in here, that is the fact. So that could be a cool name drop for people that are that know all that. So this one, Rogaloth, he works for Larlock, or at least did, and realizes that Larlock is basically trying to either free or empower or use these crystals that hold the aspect of Caius in there. And you get the quest from the Lich to basically go knock on the door of the neighboring Lich and take out his big, powerful crystal thing. So that's a really fun moment because I just think role-playing Liches is a lot of fun. It's cool to be able to see him in his house, and there's a lot of fun notes on how to role-play him effectively. The fact that he can like swoop in at any moment during maybe one of the combat encounters and talk to the players. I love all of that. It's very cool. There's, of course, a lot of things in place that can make this dungeon more challenging for people, and he's got all these wards set up to protect himself, so the players are not meant to fight a Lich, which, the scary thing is once the players are in Tier 3 or even Tier 4, they might be able to fight a Lich, but there are notes in here about if the players even try to do that, which, there are some player characters that wouldn't want to work with a Lich. There are protections in place that the Lich has, though players can't just do whatever they want to him, because it unfortunately kind of breaks the adventure up if you do that. But maybe you could let the players do that. And then the final battle you get, which oddly enough uses a different dungeon map with a completely different style, which is not great. I personally don't like the Dyson logo style at all anyway. I've gone to lengths about talking about that. This is the style I like. But it's very weird to go from one to the other in the same adventure. That is bizarre. And it's also an odd map because it's just a one-room boss battle. You don't need a full dungeon here. You just need like one room. So it's a very odd map to include. Tried to look at it twice and make sure, is this meant to be the actual? And yeah, it does say Larlock's Laboratory. Okay. It's just an odd inclusion for this to be the second, and it's just a boss fight. You walk in and there's a giant crystal thing that's got the the trapped remains of Caius in there, and then there's a big undead ancient dragon perched atop of it, like 20 feet in the air, and of course tells them to come up and touch it and become infested with worms, and hey, join the worm cult. It's all great up here. Hopefully, players decide not to do that, and a giant boss fight ensues with this cool custom dragon. Where is the notes of that one? Here we go. Tamlazin Zaka, the Paladin of Kaias. It's a paladin undead dragon, which has a bunch of. It's an ancient copper dragon, but with the added benefit of being an undead dragon. So it has like twice as many hit points, and it has an acid breath that can shoot out all the worms it's got infested in its body, which is deliciously disgusting. So a very cool boss fight. And one thing I'm really noticing from this designer is he likes to create very epic, huge boss battles, which is fun. I think that could be a very neat thing to portray, a very neat climax for any gathering. I do worry because Adventures League, I always picture them as being very tight on time. Like, you have like 4 hours or something to basically begin and to start and finish an entire adventure story, like this whole one shot. And a boss battle like that could easily take up an hour or an hour and a half by itself, if not more. And meanwhile, we've got multiple combat encounters, so it actually feels a little bit long for a module now. And I'm not going to comment on the balance, and that's all I'm going to say about the length, because the designer specifically says that they ran this adventure for like a year in the Adventures League with all kinds of different tables. So I assume they've got it down pretty pat in terms of the timing and whatnot. Me glancing at it says like, holy crap, there's no way my group would be able to get through this in 4 hours. Like, zero chance. If we have the bare minimum of combat encounters, it just seems nuts. So, and it does mention that this fight is only supposed to last like 10 rounds before Larlock shows up and just fucking murders everybody. So you're either supposed to kill this dragon, in 4 rounds, or there is a slight emergency plan you can have, which is to collapse the ceiling. You can there's an odd bit where it says the players can spend an action just contemplating. Let's see, they can spend their action deep in thought, which is weird. If they do, they recall the ceiling above is deeply cracked and that burying the crystal and the dragon should be sufficient to count as a success in the mission. It doesn't mention how you go about doing that, or if there are any skills involved or spells or what, but that's just kind of an out that you could use as a way to be able to defeat this entire thing with some kind of chance in terms of the time and the danger level present. So it's a pretty solid little adventure. It's got a good balance of everything involved. I like at least this map, but I would really prefer it. We actually included the proper full color map, so I could just slide that onto, or anybody could slide that into either their VTT or just the table itself and be able to play directly on this map. Because if it's a dungeon crawl, we need the dungeon map. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for those that came before. Pros: it's an official Adventures League module. That can be a big pro for folks that either need that or just like that that kind of one-shot-ish play style where we've got a very clear beginning, middle, and end for every single, about 4-hour session, which is, can be a big advantage. Or especially if you just want a dungeon that you can just slide into anywhere in your campaign, I feel like this one can work fairly well for that. Pros: it's a solid dungeon design with a balanced mix of exploration, role-playing, and combat. Exploration, most dungeons have exploration, but that means there's like hidden things for you to find, or there's traps to solve, or puzzles to solve, and all that. Combat, self-explanatory. And role-playing in terms of the lich that meets you at the end and basically says what a good or bad job you did, and then, hey, go kick this other guy's ass for me. I just think it's really fun to role-play liches. And pro, bouncing off of that, role-playing a lich is just a straight-up pro I put on here. I love that. I love role-playing liches. Extremely fun. I think that's a really neat, like, midway quest-giving NPC that tells you about, like, the final boss and what's going down. So I love the way that you're, like, fighting your way to the lich, and then you don't fight the lich himself. He just tells you to go, hey, fight this other thing. And then pro, helpful DM notes and appendices for running the adventure and DMing in general. We get this at the beginning and at the end. There's really great notes. I think the Dark Obelisk thing is copied and pasted from the previous adventure. But the second one, adventure guidance, gives you a lot of notes on how to. But it gives you additional notes for somebody like me that doesn't know about Larlock and all this, Forgotten Realm stuff, as well as who these liches are and how to role play. I guess Rogaloth especially. Larlock really shouldn't show up unless things have gone terribly bad. And then some tactics you can use as a DM to try and basically either make things easier or harder for the player. So it does scale a little bit. I will complain briefly, though, even though I'm at my pro section. I don't like some of the ways that it balances the dungeon to make things more artificially more difficult. Two of the things it does is have a built-in counterspell ward in the dungeon. So every time a spellcaster casts a spell, they have to worry about counterspell, which sucks. And the other thing is have the ceilings be like 6 feet tall. So any like big warriors using a two-handed weapon have disadvantage. That is also terrible. That just feels like mean for those particular player characters that happen to have those kind of builds. Cons, almost no art. We do get a little bit more art than the first Saga of the Worm adventure. But as you can see here, I'm flipping through all these pages, no art whatsoever, which again, I think is part and course for the Adventures League module, but it's still a bummer to see that. This one, oddly enough, does have a cover page, as you saw during the my intro screen, but is not actually included in the PDF here, which is very odd. And con, obviously, the big thing I went on a rant with earlier in this review, that the full-size dungeon map is a separate purchase. That is atrociously horrible. We do get the DM version of the map, which has the numbers and is very tiny, but we do not get the actual full-size grid map that we could actually use to battle on, which I think needs to be included in this adventure to get my full recommendation for it. Final verdict, Those That Came Before provides a solid Tier 3 dungeon crawl, culminating with a quest-giving lich and a boss battle with an undead worm-infested dragon. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.